Hi there. So here we are on topic 14. And if you had any questions about whether we were on the O side of the IO psychology class, it's pretty obvious here, organizational theory and development. Now, we're going to talk in two topics here. First, the different theories of how organizations can or should be organized, I guess, organizations organized. And then we'll talk about how organizations actually develop. Okay. So the first, this notion of organizational theory, there's three basic ways. Classic organizational theory that really arose with the rise of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism. So it's got a long historical basis. Humanistic theory, which you can imagine probably arose as a result of things such as humanistic psychology. And then open system theory, which is a little bit newer, but it's coming from I would, if I had to make a guess, coming out of the Gestalt psychology views of an entire system, that you can't look at individual components, just the whole system. If I had to guess where that comes from, I don't know for sure. But classic organizational theory, as we said, was the first one to arise. You see over there on the left, there's an image. It's much more of a cottage industry, very unorganized. You look on the right, it's very organized, and everybody's got a very specific function. On the left side, it is what we would perhaps call inefficient, because each person is doing all kinds of different tasks, and when you switch from one task to another, it takes time to shut down the first task and move to the second. No, on the right side, look, these workers have a very specific task, one task and one task only. It is just copy, paste, repeat, copy, paste, repeat, copy, paste, repeat, copy, paste, repeat, and repeat until the day you die. Okay? So the basic goals or ideas behind classic organization theory aren't unique by any means, but organizations exist for an economic reasons, and that is literally to maximize productivity. Did I not say this comes out of capitalism? Scientific analysis can be used to identify the one best way in order to increase productivity. Okay? And so we find that the division of labor and extreme specialization should maximize productivity, extreme specialization. And it's basically assumes that both people and organizations act in accordance to rational economic principles. Now, if you've ever heard anything about Adam Smith, perhaps you remember some of the lines, such as, the butcher and the baker don't give you your bread and the meat of the goodness heart. They do so because they believe that it is their rational best interest. And clearly there's this element of Adam Smith's rational consumer, as the forms the basis of this classical organizational theory. And so there's two slightly different ways that this is, being implemented. Taylor's scientific management and Weber's bureaucracy. Now, Taylor's scientific management probably was influenced most heavily by, for a lack of a better word, science, general scientific thinking, whereas Weber's bureaucracy was again scientific, but probably based more on the rise of sociology. I mean, Max Weber is of course a sociologist. Okay. And so here's a Charles Taylor, and he thought that there was one best way, a single best way to do things. And so he went to Bethlehem Steel, right? Probably in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, if I had to make a guess, right? Up in coal country, steel producers. And he noticed that, look at this, each worker, every time they were taking a shovel full of coal, they had to shovel coal into the fire, make the fire hot for the steel. And he found that there was a lot of variability in the shovels. So what he did was he started messing around with different shovels, and he would, bigger shovels, smaller shovels, and then what he would do is look at how many pounds, how efficient, for a lack of a better word. And so he looked at all different, and you can see in this curve here that as he raises the number of pounds per shovel from 30, no, decreases, my bad, weird graph, okay, decreases from 39, because if you put 39 pounds on a shovel, you're going to just hurt your back. You're not going to be able to make very many shovelfuls. But as you decrease it down to 23, 21, at 21 pounds, you hit peak productivity. And if you go further down there to 19, all of a sudden you've passed peak productivity and you've gotten too little, and so you're having to take too many shovelfuls or you bend over too often. And so putting this together, I mean, he points out, look, there is one best way to get the job done. And so here is the deal. An organization is just a machine, pragmatic meaning practical, basically, right? A practical machine whose goal is quite simple: run more efficiently. And so what do? Gather data, like on shovels, the perfect shovel size. Gather data on the most efficient way and then just implement the most efficient way. Okay? So these different principles are interesting. Management gathers data from the best workers. We've seen things like this when we talked about job descriptions, etc. So management goes to the best workers and looks at how they get the job done. Okay? So you're going to start at the end, which is say those workers are the most productive. Look at the behaviors that those workers exhibit, and then take those behaviors and reduce them to laws and rules, things that can easily be taught to others. Select your workers carefully and train them using this. Now, using scientific perspective and etc. Nope, that's you right there. Weber, as we said, Max Weber was a sociologist, so clearly he's a little bit different. But Max Weber looked in a similar kind of way as Charles Taylor, looking at efficient organizations, or in his, Charles Taylor's case, efficient workers, the most efficient and productive, and then taking their behaviors and breaking them down. Max Weber said, okay, let's look at efficient organizations and see how they get their job done. So he looked at the entire organization rather than the individual workers. And he created this notion of bureaucracy, which has become a dirty word. Bureaucracy has come to sort of refer to systems that are designed in such a way that even after they have outlived their useful life, continue to be implemented. Something like that. That's the more modern negative view of bureaucracy. But bureaucracy, just like classical organizational theory, felt division of labor was incredibly important. Employees are trained on a single job. And this is actually very problematic from a completely different point of view, because it is this exact thing which really, I'm not a communist, but I'm just telling you, Karl Marx, he saw this. He saw this system. He saw a system where individual workers were given nothing. Okay, an individual worker was treated like a piece of equipment, just like the factory equipment, the human was the equipment. And in the same way that if your piece of equipment breaks down, just replace it with another piece of equipment. Any old equipment is the same as any other. If the handle on the shovel snaps off, just get a new shovel. And that's how humans were treated as well, just replaceable. If a human is. And so what happens is the individual workers were so heavily exploited, because if an individual worker, let's say, caused you trouble and said, hey boss, it's really hot in here, we could use some air conditioning. Oh really? See ya, you're gone. I'll just get a new shovel to replace you. Okay? And that's what it was. If each person's job, because I mean, how much job training does it take to say, okay, all right, when the car comes down the line, this is like Henry Ford's factory. When the car comes down the line, you tighten this bolt 4 turns to the right, and then the car will move on to the next person. It takes 5 seconds to train your replacement. The individual workers have no rights at all, no ability to complain, and you're out the door if you cause trouble. Now, this really was the basis of the entire labor union movement. Lots of social problems here. But anyway, what we find is that division of labor is incredibly important. Second is this idea that the structure of the organization needs to be top down. Okay, you have to have somebody that is responsible for somebody below them. we can see two different possible organizational structures here. You could have, say, an upper level manager and then sub-manager, lower level managers, and each lower level manager is responsible for, and so delegating responsibility on the way down. But in a different organization, maybe it would be nonsense to have those three managers because, let's face it, those three managers cost a lot of money. Managers are expensive compared to a regular employee. So are those managers at that second level actually in some way or another increasing productivity? The third is the delegation of authority, where supervisors hold employees responsible. So again, what you could have is here in this top one, the upper level manager then sends down to the manager, I needed to get a task done. Then that manager sends it down to the employees, this is what we need to do. Okay? But what we find is in this notion of delegation of authority, sometimes you can get a micromanager, and I've seen those, and sometimes I am that. Okay, I'm sorry. Micromanagers can't let the task go, and I mean, I have a problem myself with this because whenever I want to if the end product is going to have my name on it in any way, shape, or form, it will be the best product which can be created. And it bothers me so immensely that if anybody that I delegate this authority to is not taking their job seriously, my name will be put on an inferior product. So I can see where micromanagers come from. However, having lived with a few micromanagers, deans, academic deans, that, you know what, this is problematic, okay? It's just, if you tell me that I have a job to do, step back and let me do the job. All right, I get in trouble because I didn't mean my dean, okay? Don't even. All right, and then the span of control is the idea, what is the optimum number of subordinates per supervisor? Because as I said, managers are expensive relative to regular employees, but at the same time, how many employees can any one manager successfully control? What is the optimum number of control? And it depends, of course, on the task, and it depends, of course, on, the situation. But again, what are some of the elements of a bureaucratic organization? As we said, standardization, of course, because it's all part of classic organization theory, and centralized decision making, where the big decisions are made by generals, and then they drop them down to the captains to get their big decisions done, and the captains then make some decisions about how to get it done. Okay? No, here. Holacracy, managing work without managers. What an interesting idea. Okay, so authority and decision making are distributed throughout the organization. Employees are defined on their roles, and so some managing work without managers. So you're not just an employee, but your role is, and so I'm not really sure on this. You know what? You do your homework. All right, you will get it. Now, clearly, humanistic organizational theory comes out of, again, humanistic psychology, and humanistic psychology has as its core that each individual is in fact unique. You got to remember that before humanistic psychology really arose, much of psychology was based on behaviorism, and classic organizational theory can really be well understood using operant conditioning. It really can. But humanistic organizational theory basically said each and every human being is in fact a unique person. Okay? And we've somewhat talked about elements of human organizational theory throughout this course when we talked about, like with motivation, and you have to know what your employee is interested in, what motivates them. What motivates one employee does not necessarily motivate another employee. So we need to know these that success of the organization is in terms of interpersonal relations, employee motivation. In other words, human beings are not just cogs in the machine. You do have to, in fact, understand these employees as individual people. So McGregor's theory, X and theory Y, we find that management it's a weird words to use, theory X and theory Y, but managers basically have two different views or theories. Employees, right? Theory X managers have this view that employees are lazy, that they only want to take care of themselves, they really don't want to be at work, they're not ambitious, they're not smart, and so you, in a very, very, very paternalistic way, need to guide them. You need to provide reinforcement and punishment and motivate, what am I trying to say? Reinforcements and punishments. Theory Y says, okay, each individual is a good person. They're inherently good. They want to this company succeed. They want to grow in the organization. We find that when managers do in fact use the theory X, or if they treat employees in the theory X manner, it's a very self-fulfilling prophecy. And maybe you've heard of self-fulfilling prophecies in other areas of psychology. But I'll start at the top. Management assumes the worst, okay? We assume that employees are lazy, uninterested in the company. If they weren't pushed hard, they wouldn't do nothing. And so what do? They treat an employee with rigid control, no respect at all. And so, of course, the employees respond negatively to this treatment. And so then what happens is that the employees become exactly what the management assumed they were going to be in the first place, and therefore causes them to treat the employees in even worse fashions. Okay, and so it's theory X is not a healthy way to go about your organization. And so here's an interesting table kind of showing different similarities and differences, because at the first level, management is responsible for the economic well-being of the organization. Yeah, sure, they're at the top, and that's true of both theory X and theory Y managers. But as you move your way down the list, clearly the differences between theory X and theory Y managers becomes quite large. And as we said, when treated in theory X ways, employees will respond in theory X ways, thus confirming exactly what the manager thought. Now, open system theory of organizations, as I said, if I had to guess where this comes from, it comes from IO psychology. If I had to guess, because I'm thinking about Kurt Levine. Kurt Levine was a Gestalt psychologist. Thank you. Kurt Levine was a Gestalt psychologist, and I'll summarize him in a very, very brief thing. So much of Western thinking thinks A causes B, B causes C, C causes D. And this is really the result of Aristotle's influence on Western academic thought. Levine says, no. You think A causes B causes C, but in fact what happens is A causes B and C and D. You change any one part and they all change. And here is the deal. If you change A, it causes B, C, and D to all change. But what happened is when B, C, and D change, they feed back into A and change A as well. But at the same time, C also changes B, and B also changes D, and D goes back and feeds C, which is still feeding into A. And so you get the idea is that if you change even one part of any complex system, all parts will change accordingly, and the changes of these new parts will come back and change itself. And eventually, and this is where it comes back to Gestalt, is that all systems will settle into the simplest output that they can, or the simplest end result, something like that. And so what we find is that open systems theory refers to inputs, throughputs, and outputs. Okay, do I have a good image on this? This is the good image, yeah. And so inputs are things such as raw materials, human resources, machinery, energy, etc. And so what we find is that throughputs are those things, in fact, the earliest chapters in our or earliest topics in our course here, right? Different training and things that feed through the system. And then an output is products, services, and knowledge. But the output is not used only to, of course, sell to your customer, but of course the output then is used to go back into the system to become an input. So the output becomes an input, right? And so when you change any one part, an input, a throughput, an output, it cycles back, and just like with Levine's notion, change one and they all modify accordingly. And so these open systems, here's the thing. See, now most systems, and again, this is more physics kind of an idea. I mean, by definition, systems are designed to die down. And I mean, seriously, this comes from bigger science. We're talking like astronomy, where star systems start with a lot of energy, and by each year they literally become smaller. I mean, that's kind of the point, and that's what negative entropy is about, is that eventually death is inevitable to occur given this notion of negative entropy. But what happens with open system theory is that since the outputs become inputs, then by definition the notion of negative entropy is no longer necessarily true, right? Because the system feeds itself rather than inevitably moving towards death. All right, so we'll stop with that and pick up on organizational development. In a little while. All right, see you then.